When disasters strike, saving lives within the 72-hour golden window is the first priority. But what happens after the rescue? This year's upcoming World Mental Health Day calls attention to mental health services in catastrophes and emergencies, because mental distress doesn't end even when the chaos does. Clare Yeo takes us through what trauma does to the brain and how survivors begin to heal.
Catastrophe takes many forms. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami swallowed coastlines from Indonesia to Sri Lanka, from India's southern tip to the beaches of Thailand. A garment factory collapsed in Bangladesh, a typhoon tearing through the Philippines, an earthquake shaking the ground in northern India. And here in Singapore, a sudden sinkhole opened up along a road causing anxiety. Or when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, deep isolation and livelihoods were lost as the world locked down and plunged into recession. The chaos outside may differ, but the shock inside is strikingly similar. Trapped, claustrophobic, waiting for rescue. Even when the world outside is rebuilt, inside, the brain is still carrying rubble. This is how trauma works. Survivors compartmentalize, building invisible walls to keep the pain contained. It's a survival instinct, but stay locked inside too long, and survival afterwards can become a prison. The way out, step by step, room by room, treatment by treatment, because each room in this brain box connects to a part of the brain that needs support. First, psychotherapy or talk therapy. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part that regulates fear, rebuilds perspective, and reframes memory. After the 2004 tsunami, survivors in Aceh, Indonesia gathered in circles, parents, children, grandparents, sharing stories of loss, of survival, of what they saw when the waves came. Talking helps quiet the amygdala, the fear center, and the hippocampus, the memory center, so the brain is not constantly bracing for another wave, another quake. But sometimes conversation isn't enough. Trauma doesn't just scar memory, it rewires the brain's chemistry. Anxiety, fear, irritability, confusion, disorientation, difficulty concentrating, even physical pain. These are common in the aftermath of catastrophe. They are the body's alarm system stuck in overdrive. And that's where medication steps in to help steady this storm. For many survivors, medication doesn't erase trauma, but it gives them the steadiness to begin therapy, to reconnect and start living again. Antidepressants can lift deep sadness. Anti-anxiety drugs calm the fight or flight reflex. These medicines help stabilize moods and control symptoms. Healing also depends on what happens outside the brain. Supportive services create scaffolding that holds recovery, education for displaced children, community groups that counter isolation. But for trauma that runs the deepest, advanced treatments can reset the brain itself. Electroconvulsive therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation. They may sound extreme, but for survivors of war zones, natural disasters, or relentless PTSD, these therapies can reset brain circuitry. Like jump-starting a heart, they give the mind a second chance.
Now, we've heard how treatment can help survivors heal, but just how prepared is Singapore's mental health response in the face of traumatic events? Here to break it down for us is Clare Yeo, who is a senior principal clinical psychologist at the Institute of Mental Health. Clare, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Now, let's start with the fact that Singapore doesn't actually experience many natural disasters or big emergencies as frequently as other countries. So why is it still important for us to develop a strong trauma response towards any potential emergencies that might happen?
Correct. So while we certainly don't experience as many natural disasters, we do have our fair share of accidents and things that happen on a day-to-day basis as well. So I think being prepared, because you cannot wait until the incident happens to respond. And there's a lot of coordination across different agencies, bodies to respond as quickly as possible as well. So I think being prepared is, our best defense towards the recovery post-incident.
Now, a lot has been spoken about individual responses when it comes to taking care of your mental health. But how is it different when we talk about the collective and how the collective or the community responds to traumatic incidents?
Correct. So when we talk about large-scale catastrophe, very often it tends to be widespread. And in today's day and age, social media and yourselves as well, it's very easy to be exposed. So, and I think people, when they see fellow human beings, being injured, suffering, naturally the human instinct will actually come out. So there is that in fact as well. And I think at a governmental level, besides responding to those who are physically and psychologically affected, we do pay some attention to those who may be watching the news as well, because we don't want to vicariously affect them as well.
What would some of the strategies you would say might be helpful for people who are exposed to a lot of content, not just in the news, but maybe online as well, when we consume a lot of such information? How can we protect ourselves from the effects of that?
Correct. So even myself, when I'm activated to respond to a critical incident, the human instinct is to want to know and read up about it and so on. But the thing is that we have to balance that with the impact of how watching the videos, right? And sometimes the videos or the screenshots are actually live and you can't really screen. So that doesn't prepare you. So one thing really to keep in mind is to really keep a balance. While there is lots of choices, media stations, people putting up videos, like for instance, vehicular accidents, right? People posing on their social media, that sort of thing. I think for our own mental health, we ought to actually pull away from it sometimes, and not just be curious and feel that we have to actually watch them.
Yeah, being more mindful about what we're consuming instead of just allowing it to take us where the content wants to go, right?
Yes.
In this case, how equipped would you say then is Singapore's emergency response system when it comes to supporting any potential mental trauma or emotional distress after such incidents?
Right. So in Singapore, as we all do, we are always wanting to be prepared. So we already have the National Care Management System. CARE is an acronym standing for Caring Action is Response to an Emergency. This is a multi-agency whole-of-government response. We do preparation, training people in psychological first aid to be able to respond to those who are affected. During the incident itself, obviously, all the agencies are responding, and post-incident as well.
Are there any other ways that perhaps unfamiliarity or the suddenness of an event might prevent people from actually being able to process it properly? In the case where there is a shock or a certain inability to respond, how would you say is a good way to tackle the issue?
I think one of the things is our brain is wired to protect ourselves. So in fact, when we are overwhelmed by a critical incident or a catastrophe, it is somewhat normal, to respond in that way. So in crisis management, we talk about our reactions being normal reactions to an abnormal situation. So when someone goes into a quiet mode, that may be their way to try and make sense of what's going on. So I think besides those that are directly affected, those of us around them can actually look out for them as well. Yeah, so I think that's the way, we like to do things here, where we have the whole village looking after ourselves, each other.
Let's talk a bit more about that collective response, right? You mentioned earlier some tips on how we can protect ourselves individually from content or from things that might be a bit traumatic. So in a collective level, let's say, in wider society or within communities as well, maybe even the family unit, are there ways we can look out for each other when it comes to this?
I think families and friends, we are familiar with each other in our good times and bad times. So when a catastrophe strikes, they can see the differences. So they are actually better to respond than, say, a professional, right? So that's how family members can actually support those who may be affected.
Claire, thank you so much for sharing your insights and also your expertise with us when it comes to tackling trauma response. I've been speaking with Clare Yeo, who is a senior principal clinical psychologist at IMH.